Before Hollywood ever called him Sir, Ron Howard was simply the boy America fell in love with. That gentle smile, those wide eyes, they made people believe that innocence still existed in a world that was rapidly losing it. To the audience, he was comfortable. To studios, he was gold. But to Ron, it was something far heavier. Because behind every laugh track, behind every perfect take, was a kid trying to breathe under the weight of perfection. He didn't ask for fame. It just arrived one day, shaped by the ambitions and hopes of two loving parents who believed they could help him balance art and life. Rance and Jean Howard weren't stage parents in the cruel sense. They were kind, disciplined, and determined to give their son a shot at something meaningful. They rehearsed with him at the kitchen table, taught him the rhythm of a line, the sincerity behind a smile. But even they couldn't protect him from the invisible machine that runs Hollywood, one that never stops asking for more. Imagine being 6 years old and suddenly becoming everyone's favorite child. Every gesture studied, every word recorded, every moment preserved. People expected Ron to always be the good kid, the perfect son of America. And he tried, he really did. He hit his marks. He smiled when told. He gave the audience exactly what they wanted. But when the cameras stopped rolling, he didn't know how to stop performing. He once admitted he was forced to hide something, but not a secret in the usual sense. What he hid was the exhaustion, the quiet ache of never being able to let his guard down. For most of us, childhood is where we get to stumble, fall, get messy, and learn. For Ron, it was a job, a performance, every emotion rehearsed. Every mistake is quietly erased. The set became his playground. The script became his homework. The applause became the sound of approval he couldn't live without. And when the lights dimmed, that silence that most of us find peaceful felt almost unbearable to him. Because silence meant he had to face himself, without the audience, without the role. At school, kids didn't quite know how to treat him. He wasn't just another classmate, he was Opie Taylor. To adults, he was something of a miracle, a polite, composed boy who never acted out. But in truth, he didn't know how to act out. Vulnerability wasn't rewarded in his world. It was corrected, refined, retaken until it looked effortless. So he learned control. He learned to be calm. And over the years, that calm became armor. It made him a brilliant director, a leader who could navigate chaos with a steady hand. But it also made him guarded, cautious, afraid to show what was real beneath the surface. Ron Howard grew up in front of America's eyes, yet in some ways, he never truly got to grow up at all. The boy who played Opie learned early that the world loves perfection, not pain, and so he hid the cracks, the loneliness, the pressure, the longing to just be normal. The mask he wore as a child didn't fall away when he became an adult. It simply changed form. It became professional. Composure, genius. The world saw a man who had it all figured out. But behind the camera, somewhere deep inside, the boy who once smiled for everyone was still asking a question he'd never had time to answer. When do I stop performing? Because for Ron Howard, the price of being Opie wasn't fame or fortune. It was the slow erasure of the freedom every child deserves. And it would take him years and a lifetime of reflection to finally start taking that freedom back. Andy Griffith wasn't just the man who played his father on screen for Ron. He became something of a compass, a quiet, steady presence who showed him that kindness could exist even in the chaos of Hollywood. Between takes, Andy would offer the kind of advice that sticks with you for a lifetime, not about acting, but about being human. He told him to stay grounded, to remember who he was beyond the camera. And Ron tried. He really did. But it wasn't easy to stay grounded when the world was constantly lifting you onto a pedestal you never asked for. People didn't just love Opie, they needed him. They needed that symbol of purity, that reminder of small-town goodness. So when they saw Ron walking down the street, they weren't meeting a person. They were meeting a memory. Fans would stop him, eyes shining with nostalgia, expecting to find that same freckle-faced boy who'd made them believe the world was simpler once. And each time Ron would smile politely, even as part of him quietly wondered if they'd ever see him. Not Opie. Not the idea of him, but the real person behind the role. That line between who he was and who the world wanted him to be began to blur. What started as affection slowly became confinement. Producers saw only the boy from Mayberry, polite and uncomplicated. Casting directors didn't see a young man ready to stretch, to fail, to surprise. They saw a brand. Even interviews became loops of the same stories, the same questions about childhood values, the same polite laughter at the same anecdotes. Ron's life was evolving, but his image wasn't allowed to. When the Andy Griffith Show ended, he thought maybe, just maybe, this was his moment to start over. Happy Days was supposed to mark that next chapter, a chance to reinvent himself, to step into adulthood. But the truth was cruelly familiar. His new character was still the safe one. Still clean-cut. Still exactly what America wanted him to be. The costume changed, the set changed, but the role. It was the same as the good boy who never let anyone down, and that came with a quiet, invisible cost. Because how long can you play the same version of yourself before you start to disappear inside it? Ron began to crave something so simple it almost felt impossible: anonymity. The chance to walk through a crowd and not be recognized. To exist without expectations. Do not always have to smile. He didn't want to disappoint anyone, but the truth was, he didn't even know who he was trying to please anymore. As Hollywood changed around him, Ron felt himself drifting further from the world that had built him. The 1960s were fading, and the new generation of stars were wild, raw, unpredictable, everything he had never been allowed to be. The clean-cut charm that once made him a household name was suddenly out of style. The world no longer wanted heroes. It wanted rebels. And in that shift, Ron found himself in a strange kind of exile, too experienced to be new, too innocent to be dangerous. He was barely 20, but he carried the weariness of someone twice his age. He had spent his entire life giving the world what it wanted, and now for the first time he wasn't sure the world wanted him at all. He had played the perfect boy for years. But what happens when perfection stops being marketable? When the smile that once comforted millions becomes the very thing that holds you back? Ron Howard, the boy America had once adored, stood at the edge of adulthood, quietly asking himself a question that no script could answer. If I stop being Opie, who am I allowed to become? The freckled boy who once made America believe in small-town goodness was growing restless. Opie Taylor had given Ron Howard everything: a name, a legacy, a kind of immortality, but it also trapped him. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw both a person and a product. He tried to break free the only way a young man of the 1970s could, through reinvention. The hair grew longer. The jeans are looser. He traded the tidy charm of Mayberry for the uncertainty of adulthood, but no matter how he looked, people still saw the same innocent face that had once smiled from their living rooms. Rejection became a familiar echo. He'd walk out of auditions hearing polite compliments that were really coded dismissals. You're great, but you're still Opie. Each no added another layer of frustration to a man who had been taught to stay composed. He wasn't angry at the world exactly. He was angry at how little room it gave him to grow. Hollywood loved to celebrate the dream, but rarely forgave those who outgrew their roles in it. Then came a spark of possibility: directing. For the first time, Ron could control the story instead of simply living inside someone else's. Behind the camera, he found power in silence. Every frame became a chance to speak in his own language. But even there, the shadow of his childhood lingered. He was meticulous, endlessly polite, calm to the point of stillness. That control wasn't just professionalism, it was armor. A habit born from years of needing to seem perfect, even when he was breaking inside. His chance to redefine himself came in 1973 on the set of American Graffiti. George Lucas saw something in him. A quiet tension between nostalgia and rebellion that fit the film's heartbeat. But the reality was harsh. The other actors saw him as a relic from TV's golden age, a clean-cut reminder of a world that no longer existed. They teased him, sometimes gently, sometimes not. He laughed along, but every jab left its mark. Nights in hotel rooms were spent replaying every offhand comment, every moment he'd felt like the outsider. He told himself he was learning resilience, that the pain was necessary. But inside, it felt like the same lesson repeating itself. Decency wasn't protection. It was vulnerability. That experience didn't destroy him, it refined him. He learned to hold his emotions tight, to reveal nothing that could be used against him. The calm everyone admired was born out of necessity, not nature. Later, he'd quietly admit, "I was forced to hide this." The secret wasn't scandalous, it was sorrow. The kind that comes from realizing that the very qualities that once defined you can also isolate you. When he met Cheryl Alley, everything changed. She wasn't part of Hollywood, and that's exactly what drew him in. She saw beyond the mythology, the good boy image, and into the quiet, thoughtful man still trying to find his footing. With Cheryl, he finally felt seen, not as a character, but as a person. Their love was built on simplicity, on shared silence, on the idea that a home could be more than just a place to rest, it could be a place to breathe. Marriage gave Ron what fame never could: safety. Yet even safety can't silence old ghosts. He threw himself into work, chasing validation through success. Each new project was both a triumph and a test, a way to prove he belonged and a reminder of the insecurities that never really left him. He'd come home to Cheryl and the kids, body present but mind elsewhere, still directing scenes in his head, still chasing a standard no one had set but him. The cracks began quietly. Cheryl noticed first the pauses that lingered too long, the distant smiles in family photos, the silence over dinner. There was no anger, just a growing ache between two people who still loved each other, but were living in different worlds. Ron didn't mean to drift. He just didn't know how to stop working, how to let go. For so long, motion had been his survival. Stillness, he feared, might expose the boy he'd buried decades earlier. By the 1980s and 90s, he had finally become what he'd dreamed of being: a respected filmmaker. Splash, Cocoon, Apollo 13. Each film was proof that Ron Howard had not only survived Hollywood, but mastered it. Yet the calm, the patience, the grace people admired weren't signs of peace. They were scars refined, invisible, and permanent. Every challenge, every delay, every creative fight triggered memories of being underestimated, of being seen but not understood. Imagine Entertainment. The company he built was a beacon of collaboration. People called him steady, dependable, the man who never lost his temper. What they didn't see was the cost of controlling the exhaustion beneath the composure, the loneliness behind the leadership. By the late 1990s, the weight began to show. The responsibilities grew heavier: aging parents, the pressures of legacy, the quiet distance within his own home. Cheryl would tell friends that Ron never truly rested, even when the cameras stopped rolling. And maybe that was the truest thing about him. Because after all these years, after all the awards and success, he was still that little boy on set, smiling through exhaustion, performing calmly so the world wouldn't see how hard it was to hold it all together.